What's up guys, it's GM Max here, and today we're going to learn how to beat the Caro-Kann. And I know I had a friend actually who told me, oh Max, show me how to play the Caro-Kann, but okay, this time we're showing how to beat it. Our game for today is actually a game between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave against Kirill Alekseenko from the Candidates Tournament 2021. It was a game where MVL just got a winning position very quickly with his move F3, which is known as the fantasy variation, and who doesn't love a good fantasy? Well, the idea of F3 is that if you take some other move such as, let's say, Knight C3, well, Black is able to take and then get his bishop out very actively with bishop F5, the Capablanca variation. Or if you play a move like E5, again, you see that Black bishop is getting to this F5 square. So by playing F3, we're just keeping our central space advantage, and we make it very hard for Black to get his bishop outside the pawn chain. I found from my own experience that looking at this line is that below 2000, most Caro-Kann players really struggle against this variation, because they're not able to play their usual Caro-Kann ideas, and they often end up very lost without a clear plan of what to go for. In fact, that's kind of what happened in the game, because Alekseenko played the move D4, which, even though it's the most common move, I think it somewhat justifies White's play, in that White does get a nice strong center, and I think that if I was playing as Black, I'd probably play it a little bit differently. Either I would play a move like E6 here, and sort of steer the play towards a kind of French, where you've got these moves F3 and C6 thrown in, which, okay, admittedly not really the ideal moves for either side to play. But nonetheless, I do think that by playing bishop to D2, and say after Knight E7, playing A3, I feel like it's a position where White can claim the better side of equality. You know, you can go bishop to D3, and well, certainly White is managing to keep a small space advantage in an otherwise equal position. Or alternatively, I think that the other move that is kind of tricky and can be a decent antidote is a move Queen B6. And granted, Queen B6 is a move that you're probably not going to see very much below, let's say, a 2-400 level. But I think it's probably one of the better ways for Black to try and equalize. The idea of this move is that after Knight C3, that Black can play D takes E4, and then try to meet Fe4 with E5, and, well, try to get some play with, like, Bishop C5 and trying to attack. And it's a line I think is quite reasonable for Black, and probably a better version of what Black tries to go for in the game. Because in the game, Black plays the immediate D takes E4, F takes E4, and E5. And the idea of this is basically that you're not just hitting the pawn, but you're also threatening a Queen H4 fork, which is pretty nasty and something you would rather avoid. But it turns out this is all part of the plan, that White played the move Knight F3. And the point of this is that if Black does play ED4 and take that pawn, we're not going to take back on D4. Instead, we're going to play Bishop to C4 here as White. And the idea is that if they play Knight F6, then we're going to castle. And we're going to hit him with moves like Knight G5, going after that weak pawn F7. Often we'll throw in a move like E5 to get that knight out of the way first. And it's actually very difficult for Black to defend when he's so far behind development. For example, I remember that the most common move for Black at a club level is the move Bishop C5, which actually runs into a very nice trap I'd like to share with you guys. That is after Knight to G5, so we go for the attack. And now it turns out that the move Bishop takes F7 is actually winning for White. Because if you play King H8, White just got the pawn back and still has a monster attack. But if you ask the obvious question, well, what if Black just takes a bishop max and then just his two-piece up for a rook? You know, what have you got there, buddy? Well, this is a chance for you to see if you can find the best move for White, to see how we can snap that trap shut on Black here, and also make sure to smash that like button as well, as you are figuring out the answer. Okay, well done for finding the move Queen to H5. We see that Black is not able to take that queen because of the pin on the knight. But then after the king moves, we take that free bishop, and well, when we count the material, White is up in exchange with a continuing attack, so it's just all over Red Rover. That's the reason why the move Bishop G4 that Alekseenko played is a better try, and it used to be thought this line was equalizing for Black, until White came up with the move C3, and well, it's not, I think, well, it's such an obvious move, Max, you know, to be able to go ED4, CD4, and simply keep the strong center, but sometimes the simplest moves are the best in chess. And after Knight F6 and Bishop C4, well, we can already see that there's a big threat in the position, that if Black were to play some move like Bishop E7 without thinking, well, then we go boom with Bishop takes F7, so that after the King F7, Knight E5, we would just win the material. So obviously that's not something that Black really wants to allow, and that might explain why Alekseenko played a move Queen to C7, but Queen C7 is actually a mistake here, and instead, the move that you have to know as Black to fight for equality is the move Bishop H5, making sure that you keep that pawn well defended. Even so, after castles and Knight BD7, I still think that after a move like Bishop to G5 or even Queen E1 and Knight B to D2, It's a position probably objectively black can equalise, but so with the extra space, white can certainly try to outplay the opponent. And it's an interesting position where the better player is ultimately going to win. Well, the game saw to move queen c7, and now MVL just punished this move very, very convincingly. You know, MVL had a little bit of a rough start to the second half of the candidates, but then with this game he started the big comeback. He played the move d takes e5, realising that, well, if you play knight takes e4 as black, after bishop f4, white just has a nice lead in development, with the pawn on e5 giving extra space. And once you trade off that knight with knight bd2, it's just very hard for black to really catch up in development and resist the white initiative. Instead, Alekseenko tried bishop f3, but after queen takes, queen e5 now, a very energetic move by white. And well done if you realise that there are bigger fish to fry than defending the pawn on e4. The move bishop f4 was the move that white played. And the idea of this is that if black does take that pawn, well, after queen takes, knight takes, you're going to notice that king is completely open in the centre. And after knight d2, white is just increasing its lead in development. Because if black takes the knight, we take back with the king. The rook comes to e1, and that's going to leave the black king stuck in the centre. You know, keep in mind after knight a6 and rook h1, the black cannot castle out a check. You know, this is one of the rules of chess. And after bishop e7, king c2, you know, that other rook is coming in. The bishop is going to invade the position. And it's just all very, very depressing for black with the king facing the powerful bishops and the powerful rooks. But if you try to retreat the knight, and still white's going to castle along, and you know, still the same kind of disaster is going to happen for black here. Well, after bishop f4, black played queen h5, trying to bail out into some sort of ending. But ultimately, after knight d2, knight bd7, and long castles, as it happened in the game, well, in that case, white has the bishop pair, he's got the space, he's got the lead in development, and often that's enough to actually win a game of chess, and that's certainly the case here. The game continued knight b6, bishop b3, and for the rest of the game, we're going to just enjoy MVL's technique to learn how we can convert these advantages into a win in our own games. So black played bishop e7, and, well, a very fancy move by white now in the move rook h to g1. And the idea of rook h g1 is basically so that if black does take the queen, which is what happened in the game, then you take with the pawn, and now your rook suddenly has a very nice open file to work with, which is pretty cool. There are other moves that could also be played. You know, you could... But one thing you might notice that white isn't playing the move queen h5, because then the knight will sort of kick the bishop, and that will allow black to try to get back into it if he's able to start kicking our piece around a little. So anyway, if I was white, I probably would have gone a4, rook hf1, but anyway, the game saw rook g1, captures. And after g6 now, a nice move knight c4, which is just bringing that rook to be very active, and also a very good principle to keep in mind when you do have the bishop pair, is that in general the exchange of pieces does favour the side with the bishop pair, because as the board opens more and more, the bishops just get stronger and stronger than a knight, or a knight and bishop. So the game went knight c4, bishop c4, and okay, b5 is probably not the best defense compared to like normal development, but okay, I can understand if black is getting a bit desperate and looking for any sort of counterplay anywhere. That's why you keep in mind, you don't always have to come right at the opponent. Sometimes you can let them weaken themselves and beat them strategically and on technique like we see here. So it's bishop b3. Black now played the move of knight to d7. And at first glance, that move looks like a blunder, but I think it's actually a very deliberate decision, where Alekseenko realized that bishop is just an absolute monster piece, and so is this bishop as well, we might add. So he thought, well, okay, I'm going to actually sacrifice a pawn and try to hold the rising ending. So not necessarily the worst decision in the world. Now, if you're wondering why exactly, you know, knight 7 is a mistake, well, the reason is because we have a little tactic in this position. We can now play the move bishop f7 as MVL played, and that allows white to win the knight and be a pawn up here. And technically, this should be a winning position, but it's not so straightforward, and definitely there's still a game to be had. So let's learn how MVL won. The game went king e6, white played rook to c7. Actually, it would have been very interesting to play the move rook d1, which at first looks like a mistake, because after rook f8, it is true that black can try to get the pawn back with rook f3. But then we strike back with rook to c7, and you know we pick up that c6 pawn, because if you play c5 and try to defend it, then there's like rook d5, and well, we can kind of see the black king is coming under a very big attack in with just free piece on the board. It's enough to do quite a lot of damage here. But okay, MVL's rook c7 is also quite a good move, in fact. And after rook h8 takes, well, bishop e3 is just making sure to get out of that rook to f8 move. The game continued with a5. White played king d2, just making sure that the king is active in the endgame. It's a very simple but very important principle, because obviously you're not really going to get made in most cases by rook and bishop alone. So a4, f4. So black is positioning its pawns in a very interesting way, where you can see that by playing the pawn a4, it means that if white does try to push his pawns, that black can try to trade pawns and in this way improve his drawing chances by giving white less pawns he can potentially promote. Because, I mean, one passed pawn by itself is not going to win the game for white. It's going to need something a little bit more to get over the edge for the win. So after king f3, black played rook d8. We had a little bit of shuffling, rook c1, c5. And now this is a point where MVL showed a very good technical move. What would you play here if you were white in this position? Now, as always, do make sure to hit that subscribe button in order to be up to date with more of my videos. And also the move for white here is the move c4. I was actually very impressed by this move by MVL because when you have these bishops on the dark squares like this, you kind of want to fix the opponent's pawns on the same color as the bishop, because that way it means that after b4 that this bishop is very passive and tied up to the defense of the pawn, whereas the white bishop can move a lot more freely in comparison. The game continued with the move king e7. And it's true that maybe this wasn't the most precise, that perhaps white could have considered trying to go for an h4, h5 plan, just to try and create an additional weakness for black on the king side. But instead, MVL played king e2, and maybe the best defense for black might actually be to play rook b8, and try to put the pawn on b3, again positioning it so that you can try to at least attack the b2 pawn with a bishop. Because in that case, let's say if we had rook d1, and b3 and a3 and bishop f6, for example. I mean, if you play a move like e5, you are admittedly giving black a nice square on f5 for the king. You know, it's an interesting question whether it's winning or not. I have a feeling the position might still be just win, reach, or draw for black at this point, just by sitting on this position and saying that, well, white has some weaknesses and his pawns are probably too much stuck on the dark squares in a certain extent. But anyway, the game instead saw black play rook d7, and MVL showed very good understanding with the move rook d1. Because often people get confused about same bishop endings, like are same colored bishop endings a win or are they a draw? But in this case, I think it does turn out to be a win. And black can't really avoid the ending, because if he tries to move the rook away, then you've got rook d5, and you know the pawn becomes a target. You're getting in moves like f5 to advance the pawns, and it's just all bad news for black. So black decided to trade the rooks, and now we get to see how MVL won this bishop ending. After bishop f8, he played the move king c2, sort of taking his time. And then b3 is another very good technical move here, because if you take, you're actually giving white's king an invasion point with b3, a4, and king to b5. But then after a3, we see that all of these pawns are fixed on the dark squares. So that means that if black loses this c5 pawn, it's basically game over. So the bishop is now completely stuck on this diagonal. And the black king is kind of need to stop the white pawns from queening. So in the end, we had the move of bishop to f8. You know, black is just shuffling back and forth, saying, well, the only thing I can hope for is that you don't find a way to convert this to a win. But of course, MVL being one of the very best players in the world, and you're one of the, and also France's top player, well, he found the way, playing the move king to g4, basically making that f5 move a threat to push that passed pawn forward and grab more space. So black played h5 to try to avoid that, but after king to f3, well, now we see that the g6 pawn is weakened, and after bishop f8 and bishop h4, black just starts to run out of moves here. The game ended with bishop to d6. You know, again, black can only really sit and wait here. And after e5, bishop c7, king e4, bishop to a5. And you could put the bishop on f8, but it's going to lose in the same way, basically. Then white played bishop g5. And after bishop b6 and bishop h6, black resigned here because he's just going to run out of moves at this point. He's going to end up in a Zugzwang, when it's like being on a deserted island, where you know you're safe, but you have to move off the deserted island and go into the shark-infested water. So the point is that after, say, bishop d8, bishop f8, white is just going to outmaneuver black with the bishop, with bishop to d6, and of course if this pawn is lost, it's game over. But after bishop to a7, bishop c7, well, this bishop is out of moves. And after king d7 and a move like bishop to a5, well, in this case, obviously, if the king gets to f5, or if we get an f5, d5, or if we get an f5, the game will quite obviously be over. But after king to e6, white can again just play a move like h4, just a waiting move to force black into a fatal Zugzwang. Either the white king gets to d5, or white gets to the move pawn f5, or if black goes bishop b8 and you have bishop b6, and you know these pawns just fall like dominoes. So there you are. Now you've seen how to beat the Caro-Kann. You've seen the power of the fancy variation with e4, c6, d4, d5, f3. And while even though this move does allow black to equalize with best play, in fact, very few players below 2000 are very comfortable facing it. White has a very large plus score in the League Chess online database. With some of the tricks that I've shown you, you'll improve your results even more. So with that being said, do make sure to like, comment, and also subscribe for more how to beat chess opening videos. So good luck with playing against the Caro-Kann with the fantasy variation, and I will see you guys in the next chess video.